do you remember Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old Iranian woman who died in police custody after being arrested over a headscarf violation? And there was a moment where it looked as though the widespread protests over women's rights and against the Iranian theocracy, the extremist religious government of Iran, it looked for a moment as if it might topple, as if the weight of public fury, public heartbreak, public protest would possibly do what successive efforts have failed to do and topple the Iranian theocracy. I don't know why my mind turned to that this morning. I really don't know why. I just think that the notion of removing the hideous regime in Tehran is at the forefront of all of our minds in a way. And the reason that I mention that first this morning is because the starting point for today's conversation will be a reminder, not just of the hideousness of Hezbollah, but the hideousness of Iran. The symmetry of sympathy that we've talked about a lot on the program, the absence of a symmetry of support in international terms, is a very, very, very different conversation today from the ones that we were having almost a year ago. But I'm not an expert on any of this, and I'm not really capable of plotting exactly what all of the differences are. But it is almost a year to the day that we sat here and contemplated the atrocity visited upon Israeli civilians on October the 7th, an atrocity that left 1,200 of them dead. There have already been more than 1,200 deaths in Lebanon since then. The figure is estimated to be 2,000. But the symmetry of sympathy doesn't take that into account. That one death is a tragedy to whomever it occurs. And I appreciate that a lot of people heavily invested in all of these issues find it kind of hard to accept that or to acknowledge that. You have to believe in the sort of hierarchy of humanity in order to subscribe to some of the positions that get an awful lot of prominence in this discussion. But the question of proportionality is back, and I don't know quite what to do with it. I remember thinking in the immediate aftermath of the Hamas attack on Israel, I remember thinking that Israel has the right to go, biblical would be an unfortunate word to use, wouldn't it? Ballistic is possibly a better one, although, of course, that has a double meaning, and it was a ballistic attack upon Israel that Iran undertook yesterday. But I remember thinking in the immediate aftermath, as we learnt the details of the horrors that had been visited upon entirely innocent people at a music festival that day, I found myself framing the thought that Israel has been handed the right to go ballistic in Gaza. A position that I held for days, if not weeks. And then for many of us, but not all, I acknowledge that, a pendulum reached its midpoint, and the sense that the response had now outweighed the provocation became, for me, impossible to resist, and I will never apologize for that. The idea that the right of response that Hamas had handed Israel, a response, by the way, that Hamas must have known was coming. So Hamas's contempt for the ordinary people of Gaza can never be factored out of this conversation or ignored, any more than Hezbollah's contempt for the ordinary people of Lebanon can be left out of discussions about the latest chapter in this hideous saga. But for me and for many other people, if you attempt at objectivity, you have to acknowledge the point past where the feeling was this has gone too far now. And then you dug into the questions of why nobody was staying the hand of Benjamin Netanyahu. And the answer was that the support of the very far-right members of his own cabinet was absolutely intrinsic to his political survival and quite possibly his judicial freedom. And that situation continues to unfold. It's not that long ago, of course, that the killing of 5 hostages in tunnels under Gaza was seen as an epic failure of Netanyahu's regime. And attention has been very, very effectively distracted, moved. Even a major Israeli trade union called a strike in response to that in an attempt to shame the government or damage the government. But that ship has sailed. The attention shifts inexorably now towards one of Israel's other borders. And then you come to this question again. Israel will pay for what happened last night. I want to ask you two questions in a way, what that payment will be and what that payment should be. Because I think that we let ourselves down a bit in the aftermath of the October the 7th attack by not being a little bit more careful with specifics. You know, I was thinking of the King Lear quote on the moor when he's gone mad, when he talks about, I will do such things. What they are, I know not, or words to that effect. Don't at me. It's not a GCSE. It's like the sense of an unleashed fury, but no definition of target. And what we have seen subsequently there has been horrific, every bit as horrific as the events of October the 7th. And of course, if you are capable of any form of symmetry of sympathy, then the deaths of 40,000 people, or however many of them turn out to be civilians, return us to comparisons. I don't even know how helpful they are on days like today. Did I just say Iraq instead of Iran? Iran will pay. I do apologize. I may have said Iran instead of Israel. You know, the harder I try to choose my words really carefully, the more sometimes I leave myself open to sausages moments, as Keir Starmer probably doesn't call them. So Iran will pay is the mantra of Benjamin Netanyahu this morning. And the reason I'm drawing some parallels, albeit that many of them are dangerous, with October the 7th, is because I can't argue with that. Of course Iran will pay. You can't fire 200 missiles into civilian areas without inviting a helpful pun, a ballistic response. I don't know how much it matters to you or to the sort of objective moral compass that the world seemed to have lost years ago, how, quotes, successful, end quotes, the attacks were. Symmetry of sympathy becomes really tricky. It even begins to sound a little bit simplistic when you compare, if you like, the death toll, the death count. But I am more frightened of being killed than I am of being compelled to take cover, relatively secure in the knowledge that I'm not going to be blown to smithereens. But I'm still not underestimating how traumatic and horrible it must be to flee for your life from a threat that is real, albeit that your government, with the support of America and the United Kingdom and many other allies, is almost certain to blast that threat out of the skies before it can do any harm to you and yours. But you can't fire missiles at a country and expect not to be attacked in return. And that's where we are this morning. Iran will pay. And that, I think, is why I started the programme, by remembering Mahsa Amini. Because for the massive, massive, massive majority of Iranians, I mean, they lose from both ends. They're going to come under attack from Israel, and they hate the governing regime that's fired the missiles at Israel in the first place. So symmetry of sympathy becomes even more urgent, doesn't it? Even more valuable. And then you have the other question, the really weird one, which would be, if, like me, you felt that this time last year Israel had been handed by Hamas the right to respond on a biblical scale in a ballistic fashion, how's that worked out? Honestly, how's that worked out? This idea that's been in place from the very start, that you would somehow eradicate. It's like Medusa, you know, like you chop off one snake and two more grow back. That's right, isn't it? That was the Hydra, I think, or one of the monsters of Greek mythology. The idea that you could chop off everything and somehow neutralize, nullify, remove the threat forever, for generations, whatever it may be. How's that worked? Should somebody have sat here a year ago and urged Israel not to respond at all? I don't know. I couldn't have done that. But in response to, I think, as things stand, no deaths. There was a terror attack in Israel yesterday, but I don't think, as far as I'm aware, the Iranian attempted bombardment has left anybody dead. I'll correct that immediately if the facts have changed or the facts do change in the course of this morning's programme. But if 40,000 deaths is an acceptable price to pay for the murder of 1,200 Israeli civilians, what is an acceptable price to pay for the murder of none? And if 40,000 deaths is an unacceptable price to pay for the murder of 1,200 civilians, then what is the correct price to be exacted by Israel from Iran for the killing of none, as far as we know? And I don't know. I don't know. But I don't know that any of the key players want peace. It's just plebs that want peace, isn't it? It's just ordinary people. It's just people who run the risk of being murdered in custody for wearing their headscarf wrong that want peace. I don't know. So, what do you think it means when Benjamin Netanyahu says that Iran will pay? Question number 1, 0345 6060 973. And what price do you think should be paid by Iran and Iranian people? Because however, quotes, limited, end quotes, the attacks may be, however, quotes, careful to avoid civilian casualties, end quotes, the IDF may profess to be, we know what happens. We know what happens. Children are already dead in Lebanon. You know, that's how careful it is. That's how limited the attacks are. And Iran looks set to follow. So I don't know. All I do know is that some of the key players, some of the big names, appear to be dedicated to this continuation of carnage. And I don't know how it stops. But I'm not sure that visiting carnage upon Iran now. So what would be better? It would be perhaps, here's a phrase that you rarely cite on the positive side of any scale. Maybe they should just confine their attacks to potential nuclear sites, because blowing up nuclear sites, that's not risky at all. And to whom would the greatest risk be posed? Iranian civilians. So I couldn't sit here a year ago and to say that I don't think Israel should respond biblically or ballistically. A lot of people got very upset with me for saying that. A lot of people who subsequently got very upset with me for having a moral compass with an arrow that moves were very delighted with me for saying that Israel has the right to respond in an incredibly robust fashion. But that's my job. That's the smallish burden that I carry. Is that if you reserve the right to change your mind as the facts change, then you earn the enmity of people who are incapable of changing their minds as the facts change. So when I said what I said about Israel a year ago, it upset an awful lot of people who've subsequently been encouraged by what I've said about Israel's overreaction or Israel's unacceptable or unjustifiable actions in Gaza. But there were 1,200 people dead in a terrorist attack when I said that. So what is a reasonable price to exact from Iran for the actions of last night? Because that is the question to which the world now turns its attention. 0345 6060 973. I don't know that today's a day for showing you how mad the responses are to the conversation that you've just heard and how people are capable of hearing completely different things from what you have just heard. But I would remind you that the question is pretty simple. What price should Iran pay for the events of last night? That's it. I don't know if anyone can answer. I don't know really what the answer will be. But I can't wait to hear what you think.